everyone, and welcome to this fifth video in our early learning series. Now from this video, we will be moving on from auditory perception to visual perception. If you are new to this series, I think it's important to take note that all of the aspects that I'm going to be discussing with you are interlinked. So make sure that you also catch up on the previous videos, and you can find the links for those in this article below. Now, before we move on to visual perception, I just want to remind you guys again that visual perception is about so much more than just seeing. Your child's vision might be absolutely fine, but they could still struggle with visual perception, because visual perception is about what the brain does with the information that it receives from the eyes. Now, keep in mind that auditory and visual aspects build the basic foundation for learning to read and to write. A lot of the aspects that I'm going to be discussing with you will sound rather familiar. And the reason for that is that all of the visual perceptual aspects have their auditory counterparts. So a lot of them will be rather easy for you to understand because we've already done them on the auditory side. I will be showing you different activities to practice each aspect on its own. But I want to also mention that jigsaw puzzles are probably the absolutely best tool to practice visual perceptual skills. It works on almost every aspect. So if you are going to be spending any money on an educational toy, I would highly recommend that you invest in jigsaw puzzles for your child. I know they get a little bit bored with them. Once they've built them, they don't necessarily want to do the same puzzle again. So a good idea might also be to connect with some parents in your area who have children of the same age or the same developmental stage, and then to swap out puzzles amongst you to keep the puzzle building interesting. All right, the first aspect I'm going to be discussing with you today is visual memory. Now, visual memory is simply going to enable your child to remember what each letter looks like, what certain words look like, and also to remember the sentences that he has read in a text, like in a book or a test, for example. Easy ways in which you can practice visual memory would be spot the difference pictures. I don't know if you guys remember those. We used to get them frequently in newspapers and in magazines. In fact, many children's magazines like National Geographic Kids still have these kind of spot the difference puzzles in them. You can also find lots of them on the internet. And the ones you find on the internet, you could either print or even just show them to your child in their digital form. Another idea for visual memory is something that we call remember and draw. So let me just find my example. I've got one for you here. So it's where we will show a child some rather simple drawings. You can make your own. Have them look at them for about 30 seconds and take the pictures away and see whether they can remember what they've seen and draw that. So you'll see for younger children, I will often give them some clues. I will draw some of the basic outline and just require them to add the detail. Whereas with younger children from the age of about 4, you can completely remove the picture and they can draw them from scratch. Memory games are also great. So you can buy many memory games in toy stores, but it's very easy to make your own as well. What you will need is a couple of sets of matching pictures that you can also print on the internet or get from magazines and stick them to a piece of card. And the idea is that you turn all of them over and then each person gets to turn 2 cards over. If that's a match, they get to keep the cards, and the person who has the most amount of cards at the end of the game is the winner. Another game we will often play in the nursery school is a game known as Kim's Game, and it's actually from the book Kim by Rudyard Kipling. And I'll show you, or I'm going to try and show you, how this works. So what I'll do is on a table or on a tray, I will collect some simple everyday items that children are quite familiar with. and I like to hide them behind my back so the kids can't see them before. And let's see if this works. So I will then show them each item at a time. For instance, here we have a block. Whoops! Where do we have it? We have a block, and we have a sheep, a very orange sheep, and we have a car. So have them look at that for a few seconds again, and then what I'll do is I will cover it. So let's use a pillow, and then say to the child, now can you remember what is under this pillow? And you can play this game in various variations. So you can increase the amount of objects that you hide. So for children who are rather young, like 2 and 3, you want to start with no more than 3 items and then add an item to the end each time. You can also, for very young children, if they struggle, I would show them 3 items like this and then cover it and take one away. And then say to them, now, can you see which item is missing? Because they will still have to access their visual memory for that. All right, then also you don't even need visual stimuli. So you could also just say to your child, ask them to remember a visual scene. Like you could say to them, for instance, can you remember what color Auntie Charlotte's dress was at Maureen's wedding? Or can you remember where Granny put the biscuit tin yesterday when we went over for a visit? Thinking about that image is going to stimulate their visual memory. The next aspect we'll move on to is visual sequencing. Now, visual sequencing is going to allow your child to see the letters in the correct order in which they appear in a word. And with visual sequencing, again, I've kept this tray on my lap because you can see that visual memory games like Kim's game is also in fact a sequencing game. Ask them to remember the sequence in which they saw the objects. And you can also, again, a variation is to, when you cover the tray, switch the objects around and see if they can spot the difference in the sequence, what's happened now, or ask them what is in front of the sheep and what came after the sheep, just to try and stimulate that sort of sequential perception. Then any kind of pattern is great for sequencing. So beading, for instance, and I'm pretty sure I don't need to show you guys an example of beading, but I thought just to make it interesting, I will give you a simple example, and of course this can become increasingly complex as children get older. You can also draw your own patterns. Draw a star and a heart and a triangle and ask your child to then copy that pattern several times on the page. Or use objects. You can literally take out all your cutlery and make a pattern using a fork, a spoon, a knife, and ask them to do the same. So they carry on until you've basically used all the cutlery in your drawers. Then, some chores, for instance, like setting the table, is also a great way to remember the visual pattern of where all the cutlery should go on the table. And other chores, for instance, like washing the dishes, has a visual sequence to it. Putting in the water, washing the dishes, rinsing them off, putting them in the drying rack, drying them, and then packing them away has a very definite visual sequence that your child can remember. You can also make story cards. So, for instance, draw a very simple story, maybe 4 figures of a little boy who goes shopping but then drops his bags and has a friend who meets him along the way who helps him pick up all of his dropped shopping. So 4 simple pictures, mix up the sequence of those pictures and see if your child can put them in the right order. And the last aspect of visual perception that we are going to be discussing today is figure ground perception. Actually, no, I'm going to stop myself there because before we get onto visual ground perception, there is another aspect of sequencing, or an example of sequencing that we often forget. So something like scheduling. I have given you a very simple example here of a morning routine, a visual morning routine, and a visual evening routine that you can visually display for your child. Not only is this going to help with visual sequencing, but it's going to make your day a lot easier. And I find that children especially need this during this current lockdown situation. This does seem to give them a little bit of something to look forward to in the day and a little bit of predictability. And again, this is just for one day, but children between the ages of about 3 and 5 can deal with a weekly schedule, and they can visualize for each day what they will be doing throughout the day. Okay, now we can move on to visual figure ground. Now, figure ground perception is about being able to see what's in the foreground against a busy background. So your child is going to use that skill in order to see the letters printed on a page, and this becomes increasingly more important as the pattern on the page becomes more complex. So think, for instance, about a busy poster advertising a theatre production. You are going to use your visual figure ground perception in order to identify each little aspect and text on that busy poster to understand what's going on. I'll give you some visual ideas of figure ground perception. So this is a fantastic poster by the Pittsburgh Zoo that I've just printed off and stolen from the internet. And so you'll see in the background, you've got this busy picture of a tree going on. And in the foreground, you've actually got a gorilla and a lion. Now there's lots and lots of these examples on the internet as well that you can either print or just show to your child in their digital form. The most famous visual perceptual exercise probably is Where's Wally, the Where's Wally books. They are fantastic. If you have access to a library and your library happens to have some Where's Wally books, I would highly recommend that you take them out for your child. You also get some other versions of these books. I'll show you some of these quickly. And they go from being rather simple, like let me show you this page. So a page like that, you can see it's really busy and your child has to focus on specific aspects, see if he can find specific objects, to some very complicated ones. So this is a book that I even struggle with. Let me see if I can show you a good example. A picture like that has a lot going on in the picture. You can also make your own, and I have taken a photo that I hope I'm going to be able to insert here in this video to show you how to do that. And what's wonderful about making your own figure ground pictures is that you can use objects that are familiar to your child. You can use his own toys or the objects that you have in your own house. So here is that picture. I hope it comes up. Okay. And then basically that is all our visual perceptual aspects that we are going to be discussing for today. And next week, we will move on to 3 further aspects that is important for your child's development. Have a good week, everyone. And then basically that is all our visual perceptual aspects that we are going to be discussing for today. And next week we will move on to 3 further aspects that is important for your child's development. Have a good week, everyone. Hi everyone, my name is Anel Annandale and I'm an educational psychologist. Here at Child Psych, we believe very strongly that each and every child deserves the best possible start in life. And for that reason, we have put together a series of videos on early learning. Ideally, these videos are aimed at early childhood educators and parents who have children between the ages of 2 and 6 years old. These videos will be available for free. You are welcome to share them, and we are going to try and keep them as short as we possibly can. Also remember that you can access the videos via Facebook and also via Instagram. Lastly, if you have any questions or comments, please do leave them for us below, and we would be happy to answer them. Thank you.